For years, fans of the hit reality series Counting Cars were glued to their screens, captivated by roaring engines, custom paint jobs, and the unmistakable energy of Danny the Count, Koker's Las Vegas garage. From the outside, the shop felt like a well-oiled machine filled with creative minds and hard-working hands crafting one-of-a-kind builds under blazing hot deadlines. But what viewers never saw, what producers carefully sliced out in edits, and what Danny Koker himself never dared say publicly, was that not every employee was built to last. Behind that brotherhood exterior, behind the late-night welding sessions and locker room laughs, boiled tension, ego, laziness, and in some cases betrayal. Now, all these years later, the silence is finally breaking. Yes, Danny Koker has finally revealed something he never dared speak while the cameras were rolling. The 5 worst employees who ever stepped foot into Count's Customs. And while he doesn't deliver their names with venom, the disappointment in his voice says it all. These weren't just employees who failed on the job. They were people who, in Danny's eyes, broke sacred codes of loyalty, integrity, and craftsmanship. But here's the thing, he didn't start out wanting to make this list. Danny Koker is someone who values discretion. He's an old-school guy, influenced by Detroit's deep motor roots and a philosophy that respects hard work over headlines. He believes in second chances, hell, sometimes even third ones. But crossing the line, whether financially, creatively, or relationally, left scars he couldn't ignore. What Danny finally admitted in a toned-down interview wasn't a hit list. It wasn't cancel culture. It was a defensive move, a kind of spiritual tire pressure release. Because like any real leader, he had to say something. Too many fans, for too long, had noticed familiar faces disappearing without explanation. Too many rumors had spun out of control, and now Danny wanted his side heard, not to point fingers, but to protect the name he built bolt by bolt. So let's dive in, starting with the first name to make the list, and why this person, once trusted to hold the reins of the shop's business side, ended up disappointing Danny in a way that still hurts today. His name? Joseph Frontier. Now, if you've watched the show casually, you might not even know who Joseph is. He wasn't one of the guys doing burnouts in the parking lot or airbrushing flames onto fenders. Joseph was behind a desk. He was the bookkeeper, the man handling the shop's most sensitive material, its money. And that made what happened next even more devastating. In 2016, Count's Customs filed a lawsuit against Frontier, accusing him of embezzling over $75,000 from the business. Let that number sink in, $75,000. While mechanics were pulling all-nighters to finish builds and the paint crew was sweating under 100-degree lights, Joseph Frontier was allegedly siphoning money from the very shop that trusted him. And this wasn't just reckless personal spending. According to court records, some of this stolen money went to fund airline tickets for personal trips, and even a down payment on a luxury Range Rover. To make it worse, he wasn't just skimming. The shop accused him of forging Danny's signature on key documents, essentially falsifying financial records to cover up his tracks. To Danny Koker, this wasn't just fraud, it was betrayal in its purest form. Count's Customs wasn't just a business, it was a family. It was his father's legacy, his childhood dream, and every single build that left that shop was supposed to carry integrity in its paint, its bolts, and its books. And Joseph poisoned that. Quietly, smugly, and with a pen instead of a wrench. What hurt Danny most wasn't just the financial loss, it was the ethical hit. Behind every shop build was a promise that no shortcuts would be taken, not on the cars and not with people. And here was someone pretending to be on the team, while quietly draining it from within. Years later, Danny's never spoken about Joseph in anger, but the pain still lingers, not because of the money, but because of the trust. Joseph wasn't just the worst employee for what he did, he was the worst for why he did it. With arrogance, deception, and no consideration for the team, he burned a bridge that can never be rebuilt. And unlike drama-hungry cast members who at least brought some personality, Joseph wasn't even visible. He was a ghost, a silent operator. And when he vanished from the show with no goodbye, few viewers noticed. But Danny did, and he'll never forget. If Joseph Frontier was the invisible betrayal, the quiet storm that wrecked the books behind the scenes, Then the next name on Danny Koker's list was the opposite: loud, present, constantly on camera, and often, too much of everything at once. We're talking about Scott Jones, the original shop manager and finance guy who made a huge impression on viewers during the first 2 seasons of Counting Cars. If you've watched those early episodes, you definitely remember Scott. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind. He was blunt, no nonsense, and never shy about controlling the money like a watchdog. But according to Danny, what started as protection for the business eventually turned into something far less helpful and far more toxic. Scott's job was always going to be difficult. Imagine trying to manage budgets in a creative powerhouse filled with mechanics, artists, and big dreams. You've got guys burning through parts lists like they're playing with Monopoly money, and you're the one who has to hold up a clipboard and say, "No, that's not in the budget." Not a fun position. But instead of finding a balance between business and artistry, Scott leaned hard into confrontation. There were countless moments where he butted heads with Danny directly, on camera. And while friction can sometimes add drama to a reality show, it also reveals deeper rifts. Scott constantly challenged Danny's decisions, even publicly undermining them. According to insiders, this wasn't just for show, it became part of his personality off camera too. What was meant to be reasonable oversight turned into micromanagement, tension, and eventually, insubordination. Danny didn't name-call. That's not his style. What he said about Scott was simple: we brought him in to straighten out the business, but eventually it felt like he was wrecking the spirit we built it on. That spirit, the garage camaraderie, the passion, the freedom to dream up insane builds and make them real, that spirit started to crack under Scott's iron-fisted control. He started saying no too often. He clashed not just with Danny, but with other members of the team. And off-camera, those conflicts grew sharper. Creative ideas got scrapped to save pennies, build times were cut short, some projects were almost abandoned midstream, all because of pushed financial anxieties. But here's where it gets stranger. After season 2, Scott Jones vanished. No farewell episode, no mention from the crew, no dramatic showdown, just gone. And that silence only made fans more curious. Theories started popping up online. Had he stolen something? Was there another scandal brewing? But Danny cleared the air, saying simply that Scott moved to Tennessee to be closer to family, and sure enough, he resurfaced there, opening his own performance shop, doing what he did best, building and fixing cars. But his time at Kustoms, Danny wouldn't say much, but you could hear the finality in his tone. The break wasn't mutual, it was necessary. Fans sometimes ask, was Scott really one of the worst? After all, he did help manage workflows. He kept projects grounded. He wasn't incompetent, but in Danny's world, the worst sin isn't failing, it's destroying the vibe. And Scott, with all his numbers and control-freak energy, slowly did exactly that. Danny puts it this way: you don't build award-winning customs by looking at spreadsheets. A calculator can't measure vision. And that quote hits hard. Because more than the cars, more than the builds, Counting Cars has always been about something ephemeral, garage soul. When that starts to get suffocated, it doesn't matter how sharp your financial skills are. So Joseph betrayed trust through numbers. Scott suffocated creativity with control. And then there's the third name in the lineup, which Danny calls the heartbreaker, Rolly Sabo. Or as fans love to call him, Rock and Rolly. Now this one stings, because Rolly wasn't a villain. He was hilarious, energetic, and had an accent that made even the most mundane detail job feel like a party. Rolly was the comic relief, the cleanup crew, and the joyful glue that kept things light when the pressure hit a boil. Fans loved him, and so did Danny. For a while, but behind that laughter was a growing problem: inconsistency. Rolly was a showman, yes, but he was also Count's Customs lead detailer. That meant every car, after all the blood, sweat and welding, landed in his hands for the final shine. And as the show's popularity skyrocketed, that spotlight seemed to shift something in Rolly. According to Danny, things started going missing, not parts, moments. Deadlines were missed, Rolly would show up late, or not at all. Communication grew spotty, and while Danny never accused him of anything malicious, he said, the dude just couldn't keep up anymore. He let the show go to his head. The turning point. In 2017, Rolly's trailer was stolen, along with thousands of dollars in custom tools. Local news picked it up. It was devastating. But what followed wasn't public outcry or crew unity, it was distance. Rowley grew isolated, disconnected, not angry, just absent. Eventually, like others before him, he vanished from the show, again, without explanation. Danny never trashed him. In fact, when asked about Rowley, there was still a touch of affection in his voice. But he admitted that despite his likability, Rowley made the top 5 worst because he couldn't meet the moment. When the show needed reliability, precision and professionalism, Rowley was stuck between a punchline and a party. After leaving the show, he launched his own detailing company, and fans say he's doing good work. But Kustoms moved on, and Danny made sure they did so without another backward glance. 3 names down, 2 to go. And the next one is, without question, the most controversial departure in the entire franchise. A man who literally painted himself into stardom, and out of a job. When it comes to the wildest, boldest, most polarizing personality ever to walk through the doors of Kustoms, it's not even a debate. The 4th person on Danny Koker's list, one of the worst not because of incompetence, but because of repeated clashes, missed cues, and personality overload, is none other than Mike Henry, better known to fans as Horny Mike. Now if you've ever watched Counting Cars, you know Horny Mike can't be ignored. The guy wore a horned helmet, rocked neon-colored mohawks, and painted airbrushed masterpieces straight out of a Mad Max fever dream. He was electric, flashy and unforgettable. In many ways, he became the show's mascot, a human highlight reel that punched up every scene he was in. But according to Danny, the same fireworks that made Mike a fan favorite also made working with him feel like walking through a field of live wires. From the beginning, Danny respected Mike's creativity. That wasn't up for debate. The guy had raw, unbelievable talent. He could take a plain fuel tank or helmet and turn it into a surreal work of art. His imagination had no bounds. But here's the catch, neither did his ego. As the seasons progressed, and the cameras got closer, something shifted. Horny Mike started acting less like a craftsman, and more like a star. And while confidence isn't a crime in Danny's shop, distraction always is. More and more Mike's time was spent chasing publicity, doing outside gigs, and juggling side hustles. The show's producers didn't help matters either. They loved Horny Mike. He was TV gold, charismatic, funny, visually striking, and with that kind of attention came entitlement. Danny said it bluntly, "There were times I felt like I had to re-explain leadership to a guy who knew better." There were creative disagreements, serious ones. Mike wanted to push boundaries. Danny wanted to keep the customer happy. Sometimes that meant telling Mike no to a wild, otherworldly design, and Mike didn't always take that well. What started as passion turned into pushback. In the later seasons, on-air tension became uncomfortable, and off-air, even worse. But Danny doesn't hate Mike. In fact, he still considers him one of the most naturally gifted artists he's ever worked with. That's what made his placement on this list difficult. But he calls it like he sees it. To Danny, Horny Mike's biggest problem wasn't misbehavior, or even laziness, it was distraction. "You can't build your brand on my time," Danny said. "We were in the middle of changing people's lives with those cars, and if your mind's in 5 different places, you're not there with us." As time went on, Mike's involvement in Kustoms decreased. He was still around, but sporadically. He launched Horny Mike Designs, started attending more conventions, and used his reality fame to build his own path. There's no shame in branching out. But from Danny's point of view, you earn that freedom through consistency and commitment. 2 things Mike stopped showing regularly. For the record, Mike was never fired. He wasn't shoved out. He just peeled away. Slowly, deliberately. And though Danny never publicly commented at the time, this recent admission confirmed what loyal fans suspected: the airbrush king was fading long before the cameras stopped rolling. What stings about Mike's chapter isn't the drama, it's the potential lost. Danny gave him a platform, trusted his instincts, and often bent the rules to let Mike run wild. But in the end, Mike pulled away, more focused on being Horny Mike the brand than Horny Mike the brother in the garage. For Danny, that loyalty split is enough to earn him a spot among the worst, not because of who he was, but because of how he walked away. So that's 4 names: betrayal, control, inconsistency, ego. Each one chipped at the very thing Danny built: a team of brothers, a legacy of passion. But now, we come to the fifth and final name. And this one is different. This name isn't surrounded by lawsuits. There's no public scandal, no missing trailers or courtroom transcripts. This man didn't fly too close to the sun and burn up in his own ambition. He didn't rebel, steal or fight. He simply disappeared. And that's why, in Danny's words, he was one of the biggest letdowns of all. Because Shannon Ikal, Count Kustoms' lead motorcycle builder, didn't break the rules, he broke the rhythm. Shannon has always been underrated by casual viewers. Quiet, humble, buried under a shaved head and tattoo sleeves. He wasn't built for the spotlight. But when it came to fabrication, to bikes, the man was a genius. Some of the greatest two-wheel builds ever to roll out of Count's Kustoms came from Shannon's hands. For years, he was Danny's go-to guy for anything that needed more than just flash. It needed soul. But as the seasons progressed, fans started to notice it. Less screen time, fewer interviews, less Shannon, period. By season 7, he was barely there at all, and just like others before him, he was gone. No exit announcement, no goodbye, no farewell party. Danny stayed silent at the time, but now, finally, he's opened up. He said, Shannon didn't mess up, he just stepped off the ride, and didn't tell any of us why. And that, to Danny, hurt more than any scandal, because when you build a legacy together, when the cameras are off, and the grinding continues, loyalty means showing up, even when it's hard. Shannon didn't. One day, he just wasn't there. There were rumors, creative differences, fatigue, burnout. Maybe Shannon didn't like the direction the show was going. Maybe he preferred the quiet over the chaos. But no call, no meeting, just gone. Danny still speaks fondly of him. He knows the man's talent, respects him deeply. But as a leader, Danny measures people not just by what they produce, but how they finish the job. And to him, Shannon walked away, mid-build. For most leaders, the greatest disappointments aren't always tied to specific disasters. They're tied to people who should have known better, people you poured energy into, built with, trusted, maybe even considered family. That's the part the audience forgets when they watch a reality show like Counting Cars. They see the hot rods, the drama, and the laughter. What they don't see are the expectations off camera. The real blood price Danny Koker paid to get those engines running, and to keep the people behind them together. When you ask Danny today about those 5 employees, Frontier, Jones, Rowley, Horny Mike, Shannon, he doesn't rant. He doesn't roll his eyes or badmouth anyone. No, what you hear in his voice is something more complicated: weariness, lessons learned the hard way, a little pride maybe, but a lot of pain. Because you've got to remember something: Danny didn't become a television personality by design. Counting Cars was never the dream. The dream was the garage, the builds, the culture, the gearhead brotherhood. Vegas just happened to be where it all came together. The History Channel noticed what the rest of the world had yet: a passionate madman running a real garage that looked and felt like something out of a graphic novel. Genuine. No acting, no script, just sweat, talent, and vision. The problem: fame changes everything, even the most grounded teams. Danny has said it himself: TV doesn't make you fake, it just exposes who you already are. And when the cameras came in, that's when the cracks began. Some guys handled the spotlight by showing up earlier, working harder, and keeping their heads down. Others, they started looking in the mirror a little too long. They started caring more about lighting than welding. Egos swelled, creative decisions turned into power struggles, and the shop, a place built on trust, started to feel fragile. Let's be clear, these weren't talentless people. Each of those 5 employees brought something unique. Joseph was sharp on paper, methodical, and had no problem wrapping numbers around chaos, but his ambition twisted into exploitation. Scott knew how to run a system, keep a business tight and ultimately though, his grip choked the soul out of the shop. Rowley had spirit, charisma, and everyman appeal, yet he lost direction when the stakes got real. Mike was a force of nature with artistic depth few people possess, but he let attention dilute the quality of the brotherhood. And Shannon was a builder's builder, a craftsman, who understood machines like some people understand music. But he disappeared when Danny needed him to stay.
Each exit was different. Some were fast, some were dragged over months, some involved investigators and lawyers, others ended with nothing but silence. Yet the impact was the same. The team changed, the vibe got rocked, and Danny, who had spent years building his shop like a custom dream machine, had to rebuild, restabilize, and keep the gears turning under a global spotlight. There's a recurring lie in shows like Counting Cars, and Danny knows it, that what happens in the garage is easy, disposable, even replaceable. Someone walks out, fine, plug someone else in. Lost a fabricator? There's a dozen in town who'd kill to be on TV. But that's not how it works, not in Danny's world. You can't fake real, not in a build, not in a crew. When someone leaves Counts Customs, they're leaving more than just a job. They're making a statement about who they are, and sometimes, who they can never be. This is why, years later, Danny finally chose to speak on it. He's not naming names for drama. He's not trying to spark a gossip fire. No, he's lifting the curtain for the fans who rode beside him from day one. The ones who watched the chemistry, the builds, and the stories, and felt like part of the crew. They deserved to know why some faces vanished, and they deserved more than fan theories in Reddit threads. So, when asked, Danny didn't dodge anymore. He laid it out plainly. The 5 worst employees weren't the worst people, but they were the ones who let down the dream the deepest. And that dream, by the way, it hasn't died. If anything, it's evolved. Because for every person who walked away or burned the bridge, Danny found someone new, someone hungrier, more focused, sometimes younger, sometimes older, but always real. The shop today, it's a different crew with the same heart. And Danny, he keeps tabs on all 5 of the guys who made his list. Not out of spite, but out of curiosity. How do you rebuild after leaving something you helped build? Some, like Mike and Rolly, carved paths of their own. Others dropped off the grid entirely. And still, 1 or 2 might walk through those old garage doors someday, just to say hi. But none of them are likely to be asked back, because Danny doesn't hold grudges, but he never forgets. And when he finally named those 5, that door closed. Maybe not locked, but closed. Because the engines are still roaring in that shop. And Danny, he's already too busy chasing the next dream to fix the wreckage of the last one. If there's one thing Counting Cars taught its massive audience over the years, it's this. You don't last in that garage unless you're damn good at what you do, and committed all the way through. Not 80%, not when it's convenient, all the way. And that's the real root behind Danny Koker's reveal of his 5 worst employees. It wasn't about public embarrassment. It wasn't about drama or social media traction. It was about standards, the non-negotiable ones that define who you are when no one's watching. Because for Danny, it's never been about building cars. It's about building discipline. That's what his father taught him. That's what Detroit instilled. And that's what Vegas tested relentlessly. Counts Customs wasn't built with flash or hype. It was built with focus, brick by brick, build by build, mistake by mistake. And when employees violated that code, whether through greed, instability, ego, or absence, it chipped away at something more important than ratings. It chipped at culture. And culture doesn't get rebuilt with new paint or a slick edit. It gets rebuilt through pain, experience, and choosing better. Again, Danny's shop isn't a place where you just learn how to restore a '68 Camaro or flip a Harley into a chrome dream. It's a place where you learn how to show up right, early, focused, committed. And if you think a camera crew, or a paycheck, or your role in a reality show makes you more important than the build beneath your hands, you'll find the exit soon enough, voluntarily, or not. When Danny speaks about his current team today, there's pride in his voice. Measured pride, not the loud kind. The kind that comes from seeing round 2 of a dream take shape. He admits, it stung to lose the guys he once considered foundational, but it taught him how to read people better. And it reminded him that no matter what the contracts say or the viewership spikes show, someone's either real, or they're not. And the shop needs real, especially now, because the world changed. TV changed. Reality programming isn't what it was when Counting Cars first aired. Audience attention spans are shorter, content is faster, the drama's louder, the edits more aggressive. Networks want viral moments, outrageous feuds, breakdowns in the paint booth. But Danny never chased that. He let the work speak first, and his team was supposed to do the same. That's what made the misfires from those 5 names feel so personal, because he wasn't asking for perfection. He was just asking for alignment, loyalty, drive. And when any of those slipped, it wasn't just the builds that paid for it, it was the brand, the trust. People forget that Kustoms is a business with real clients, not just History Channel producers. When a team member walks off set or under-delivers on a project, it doesn't just mean footage gets cut. It means a real person who dropped real money doesn't get what they were promised. And Danny doesn't take that lightly. That's why a guy like Joseph Frontier, the accountant with wandering hands, made the list instantly. Once the word embezzlement is whispered, there's no second chance. Why Scott Jones, as disciplined as he was, ended up alienating morale and putting creative oxygen on lockdown. Why Rolly, for all his jokes and energy, couldn't keep his feet planted when it mattered. Why Mike the wild genius let his head drift too far into branding and not enough into the brotherhood that made him. And why Shannon, despite his Zen genius and golden hands, hurt Danny most by walking away without a word. Each one showed promise. Each one added value. And each one, somewhere along the line, stopped showing up for the real reason Kustoms existed. Because when the paint dries and the cameras shut off, the only thing that matters is whether you carried your weight, whether you protected the dream, whether you followed through. Danny Koker once said something during an off-camera interview made it into the show. He said, "I don't fire people because they fail. I fire people because they stop trying. I can teach a guy to weld. I can't teach character." That quote stuck. And maybe that's the essence of this entire story. Frontier failed because he chose greed over gratitude. Scott let control override connection. Rolly traded reliability for charm. Mike got high on his own name. Shannon ghosted the dream instead of steering it toward the finish. Are they bad people? No, Danny doesn't say that. He doesn't paint villains. He paints people in reality, the messy, flawed, momentarily brilliant humans we all are. But that doesn't mean he'll invite chaos back in. Not when Kustoms is still building, still thriving, still turning cold men into moving art. And that's the biggest twist of all. After nearly 10 years on the air, after setbacks, court battles, public exits, and crew shakeups, Danny is still at it. Same drive, same garage, new crew, different energy. But the mission, that hasn't changed one bit. It quotes it's easy to watch a show like Counting Cars and forget there's real life happening behind every perfectly lit frame. What you see on camera, the laughs, the blow-ups, the impossible builds delivered just in time, it's all true, but it's also curated. What you don't see are the hours lost to parts delays, the tension between creativity and client expectations, and the deep personal risks Danny Koker takes just by trusting the people around him. That's what makes his reveal so meaningful, not just as gossip, but as truth. For the first time, Danny pulled back the curtain and let fans see what it really cost to build an empire that millions admired, and only a few were worthy of standing inside.